You're about to listen to one of the interviews that I have done for my brand new book, Leading with Vulnerability, which is now available for pre-order. This interview was done last year. It took place in 2022, and it was one of the over 100 CEO interviews that I have done. If you're interested in pre-ordering the book, you can do so now by going to leadwithvulnerability.com. And if you pre-order a copy of the book, you'll get access to all sorts of really cool bonuses, which you can find out about by going to that URL, leadwithvulnerability.com. The way that this is going to work is the first half of these interviews are going to be available on all podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, etc. And to get access to the second half of these interviews, you're going to want to head over to greatleadership.substack.com and enter your email there. And we're going to be posting the second half of all of these interviews on Substack. So if you want to get notified when those go live, that's where all of those are going to be taking place. Today's interview is with Lard Friese. He is the CEO and chairman of the executive and management board at Aegon. It is a Dutch financial services group with over 22,000 employees. And you will see that during this conversation and all the other conversations I had with CEOs, I'm asking them all sorts of questions related to leadership and vulnerability. And this is ultimately what formed the foundation and the basis for a lot of the concepts in the book. But I actually just wanted to share some of these interviews with you, with the public, so that you can hear how CEOs are actually talking about leadership and vulnerability inside of their own organizations, inside of their own lives and their experiences. Because of course, when I write the book, these are all hour-long conversations. I can't include hour-long quotes from all the CEOs. So I wanted to make some of these conversations available for you so that you can hear exactly and directly from these CEOs what they think about leadership and vulnerability. So let's get right into this conversation. Again, this is with Lard Friese. And if you want to pre-order a copy of the book, again, leadwithvulnerability.com. Let's get right into this discussion with Lard Friese. Okay, so a very first question for you is when you hear the phrase vulnerable leader, what does that make you think of? What comes to mind?
Well, there's a number of interpretations, right? So a vulnerable leader is a leader who is, I think, in touch with his or her environment and who has the courage to show a lot of their personality in the way they operate. That's one way of looking at it.
Okay.
The phrase that you often see in newspapers, like the leader is in a vulnerable position, usually means something else. It's usually that there's a challenge in front of that leader, and that the leadership is questioned. So It's an interesting. It's got multiple perspectives, that phrase.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned courage. Why do you think you need courage as a leader to show your emotional state?
I think it's. I think it requires a certain element of courage because you're showing who you are. In your authentic self.
Yeah.
Which requires courage, because often you need to do that as a CEO of a leader of a large organization, and certainly a public company. You're doing that in public environments. And as a result, people can take advantage of that. And it may, the words that you use or the expression that you give to something or the context you give may be put out of context. And that's what is very important, certainly in public appearances, is that you're always aware. So there is this level of awareness that, unfortunately, vulnerability can be, I think, a very powerful element of your leadership style. But it's also vulnerable in the sense that people can make advantage of that. And if they do that, they may twist your words, take it out of context, and assign a meaning to it that you never meant. And as a result, I think as a leader, you need to combine to combine it with, and I think that's where that's a very important, I think, other notion, with awareness. You need to be continuously aware of the environment that you're in,
Yeah.
the 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 audience you're engaging with, the role you play, the
Yeah.
role you have, and need to connect that to the human person that you are.
Has that ever happened to you? You being vulnerable and then it backfired, or somebody used it against you, or I don't know, asked for help or shared a failure or talked about something personal and somebody twisted it and used it against you to hurt you some way?
When I was very young, in the early days of my career, I was actually working at Aegon for the first time, because I had worked at Aegon for, I think, 20 years ago for a period of 10 years. And then I left for
Wow.
20 years, and now I'm coming back as CEO of the group. But when I was a young and up and coming talented, well, young talent as people called it, and I was moving quite fast through the ranks. So I was, I think, in my early 30s. I remember being asked by the communications group to do an interview, because they wanted to showcase, and the organization was proud of having a young leader with such, large responsibilities. And at that time, being in the early 30s and having a large responsibility was not very normal. So they wanted me to do that interview. And I remember that I did that interview, just who I am, and, not holding back a lot, etc. And I remember that that I needed to take, that photos were taken of me, etc. And I remember that when we walked to the elevator after the interview, of course, I made the rookie mistake that the interview is only over the moment that the journalist is really in the car back, or in the train back. So that journalist asked me something like, you're a very ambitious person, right? So you want to be at the top of this company at a certain point. And I remember saying, well, there's a lot of pressure at the top of the house, or something like that. And there's a Dutch saying for it, which I find very difficult actually to express, but it is de string op de apenrots. I don't know how you say that, but that became the headline, of course, of the article.
Oh my
And
God.
they had portrayed me in a way that I really did not recognize myself anymore. I was portrayed as a extremely aggressive, ambitious young man that would burn everybody around him to get to his objective. And they had taken quotes and excerpts from snippets of things that I said, took it out of context. And I remember that I was really hurt, because it was public. It was publicized. My mom and dad said, "What is this?" And I remember that. And my friends were saying, "Really?" And I was also like, "Wow, that really hurt."
Yeah.
And from that point onwards, it was, of course, a silly rookie mistake, right? So from that point onwards, I knew that, yeah, you have to, I have to be aware that not everybody, not everybody may take the words that you use with the intention that you have, and may twist it or frame it to another purpose and another use, and that may happen. So what I did is, first of all, that was a huge lesson for me in being very aware about what you say publicly and how you act publicly as a leader. I took a lot of training, and I still do, after so many years, a lot of training to make sure that in that media environment, I do not slip up.
Yeah. But did that, 'cause, for a lot of people, if that happens, the initial reaction is like, I'm never going to be vulnerable again. I'm never going to share anything personal again. I'm not going to do any of that sort of stuff. So how did that impact you as far as being vulnerable later on in your career, with your team, with other leaders at your company? Did it keep you from being vulnerable and kind of like teach you to never share anything personal again? Or how'd you get over that?
For me, that's been a learning process, honestly, not as a result of this particular incident. But I think that if I would look at myself today, and I'm 59 years old, and I go back to throughout my career, I think that the being comfortable with who you are requires a sense of personal maturity. So I recall in the early phases of my career that I was very guarded because I wanted to do everything well and I wanted people to have a very good impression of me. I wanted to advance myself and do the things right, etc. So I was not known for a person who would share personal experiences or to open up about something other than the professional piece of my persona. But the interesting thing is that if I reflect on this over the years, as I grew older and became more mature, and also became more comfortable with myself, learning who you are, knowing what you can do very well, but also being comfortable with where you need help, you're not that great at, accepting that not everything has to be perfect, that actually the imperfections make you somebody that people want to work for. And, and that piece of it, the more comfortable and the more mature I became, the more vulnerable I was. I was willing to put myself out there, and it also feels quite normal. I'm not a person who is guarded all the time, and I was guarded all the time, but I'm not that guarded anymore. I am very aware, Jacob. So I'm very aware of the situation that I'm in, but it's become a little bit second nature, I think, throughout the years. But I now, and I remember my children played a very important role in this because when they became a bit older, they said, Dad, if, younger people especially in the company, in the former company that I was CEO of, and in the company before that, I was also CEO of another company there, they would say, we want to know more about you personally because we want to be able to connect with you.
Oh, the employees would say that?
Yeah, they would say, we're not only working for a company, to a certain extent, we really work for you. And I wasn't really thinking about it that way. I thought people chose a company to work with, et cetera. And they said, no. We want to know who's running the company, what kind of a person you are. And my children talked to me a lot about that as well. They said, you really need to do that, Dad. It's extremely important. People need to get to know you for the person that you are, because it is important for them to know who they work for and what kind of, and they can put your words in a better context. Yeah. They can get inspiration from you as a leader much more if they know who you are, where you come from. They need to connect. It's all about connecting with people.
It's interesting how the assumption is that when you're younger in your career, you should be more the assertive, aggressive, know everything. But the older you get, the more seasoned you are. And I see this across the board from a lot of the CEOs I've interviewed. They all say the same thing. Like, yeah, we realize that that's not, the best way to lead or the best way to work. Yeah. But I'm always really curious, why is that assumption there when you're younger? And why does it go away when you're older? Like, did somebody teach you that? Was it modeled for you at the companies you were a part of? When you went to school, did they teach that? Like, where did that come from? That assumption that you should know what you're doing, don't ask for help, don't make mistakes. How did that come into your mind? Because it had to come from somewhere, right?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking, right? It's an extremely good question. Because here's the weird thing. My father and mother always told me, and my brother, by the way, we were with four of us, to just be who we are and do your best, and then everything will be fine. The only thing you have is who you are, and don't be afraid of that. It's a lot what you are. So, put your best foot forward, work hard, and then good things will happen to you. And be honest and truthful to yourself and behave well and respect others, etc. So I think it has to do with the generation that I'm a part of, and the way careers were made in companies. In the early days of my career, I do not believe there was so much. It was a lot about results. Maybe it's the kind of companies I grew up in as well. Could be the same thing. So I'm not saying this is the truth. It's just my experience. That it was all about the results, about what you achieved, what you created, how you worked with others, how you collaborated, the teamwork the way you were able to communicate, the way you were able to interact. And through merit, you grew in the kind of roles that you were assigned to you. And I remember having a burning ambition, to progress. And as a result, maybe I felt that was the best way to progress in my career. And then when I was 35, I learned a very harsh lesson, which was, I think, a real turning point for me in coming to a very harsh lesson. And that was a big turning point for me. And I think that's when I started to think differently about this.
What was the lesson when you were 35? Is that when your team members were telling you that they wanted to connect with you and you should open up, or was that something else?
It's a short story, but it's actually, I was at a very young age made the leader of a business unit with a very large business unit. I had to introduce a complete new technology platform in that unit. And the organization was telling me that in spite of all the development, it was not working well and we should not introduce it. And against all the advice from the people in the organization, I was pushing it through anyway because, one of my objectives was to make sure that the cost structure in the company was structurally reduced. And as a result, this was the key lever to get that done. That backfired big time, and it led to a complete reject of that platform, but also, and more importantly, a reject of the people in my team and the people who were working for me in that business unit, who said, who thought this guy is not, he should not be in that job. And at that point, I remember that I was taken out of that job, only to find at that particular moment that when I came home, my wife also was on the brink of firing me, because she said, "You've not been around for paying attention to me or to my children, and to our children. You've not been a good father." So I came into this perfect storm that at the company things were not going well at all.
Yeah.
And at the same time at home, I had also not been a great father and a good husband. So that all came together in a perfect storm. It was just before Christmas, and I remember that my bosses at the time said, "We have put you too young in that position, and we have not coached you well. So we need to learn from this. You need to learn from this. We're not going to fire you, but we're going to give you a new role somewhere else in the company where you can grow in the wings, if you will." Now, when I then went away and took a 10 days vacation around Christmas, I made sure that I made amends with my wife and with my young family, and luckily she gave me a second chance because she's still my wife, and we still have a wonderful family life. But I really changed my ways in my personal life. But when I came back, I said to my bosses, "I don't want to have a new job somewhere else in the company. I would like to be demoted in the same business unit."
You asked to be demoted?
I asked to be demoted in the same business unit because I said, I want to clean up my own mess and try to regain the trust and from the people that I've actually abandoned as a leader. That was a very particular moment. I've worked very hard for years to make amends, and in the beginning that was very difficult. And the only way for people to accept me in that demoted role, cleaning up the mess, was to take ownership for the mistakes that I had done, to reflect deeply on the behaviors, etc. And you can only do that if you learn not to be perfect, because you're not, and to open up and to show people who you are. And you connect at a different level, and I saw the power of that, and then collaborate and work and earn trust back that I had lost. And that has been a absolute pinnacle crucible moment for me in my career to understand how important it is to be aware, but also to be vulnerable and to
Yeah. I love that story. So let me make sure I understand. So this was, like you said, you were in your mid 30s and you were responsible for deploying this really big technology project that was supposed to reduce costs. And even though everybody
yeah
around you was telling you it's not a good idea, we're not ready or whatever, you're kind of like, you know, full speed
yeah
ahead. And it ended up not going well. And because it didn't go well, you alienated a lot of your team members who basically were trying to
yes
tell you,
yes
stop, stop, stop. Um, and then so after that happened, I love that you, instead of going to a different team, I mean, it probably takes a lot of vulnerability to go to your boss and say, look, I don't want to go to another team. I want to stay on this team, but demote me.
yeah
And you kind of have to rebuild trust and confidence with the very people who were kind of like,
yeah
upset at you to begin with. So
yeah
how did you do that? So, your boss obviously says, okay, fine. So it's your first day back on the job after this big failure, this big mistake. How many employees? How big was your team?
Well, my team at the time, I think, was like my direct management team was like 8 people or something, but the entire business unit was 1,000, something
1,000.
like that.
Okay. So what did you communicate with your team? Because I'm sure everybody knew you were responsible for this, and you probably had a lot of angry, frustrated people.
Yeah.
And here you are, you're back. They're like, oh, great. Now what? So what did you communicate to your team, and how did you communicate with them that, you're going to rebuild trust, and what did you do?
Well, first of all, they didn't want me, so
Oh, they
that's where it
didn't.
started. No, they didn't want me in that role at all,
Oh,
and so it actually, first of all, I had a wonderful boss who stepped in my old position, if you will, and who actually told the organization, look, you don't want this, but you're wrong. You should want this. And so he provided let's say the environment for me in which I was able to actually try to find that connection. But it's quite a humiliating experience, of course, and you need to and the first thing you need to do is make sure that people understand you own the problem, you truly own it, and that they see that, and they can only see that if you show it.
yeah.
Secondly, they needed to understand what my intentions were. Is this an ego trip? Or is he truly, genuinely wanting to fix stuff because he feels that is it genuine, or is it just another way for him is it an ego trip or something like that? So that requires a lot of listening, asking questions, a lot of listening, not only with your ears, but also with your heart. So you really need to listen very carefully to what people are trying to tell you. And then the most important thing is that you realize, I'm asking for help. I need to ask for help. And if you ask for help, and you're not used to asking for help, the moment you do that, it is a revelation that is an extremely powerful question to ask somebody. Can you please help me? Because I want to help the company to become better. I know I messed up. I ask you to give me a chance, and I ask you to help me. If you do that, that's pretty. Then you suddenly notice how many people are ready to help.
Yeah.
That's why I always say asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
But you need to go through that I needed to go through that personal experience in order to have that insight. See what I mean? To have that insight.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and then people need to be convinced you're genuine, and that it's not about you, but about what you want to achieve and what you want to help the company to
How did you
progress.
do that, by the way? The genuine. How did you connect with your your people, because they probably thought originally when you wanted to push everything through, it was about ego, right? It's my project, I'm going to see it through. And now you're going to them and saying, hey, it's not about ego. How did you build that trust where they would say, well, you know what, we believe them?
Small steps. You need to earn your way back. And you need to realize that you need to, if you lost trust like that I did, right? I lost trust. I was demoted, huh? So I was not in the same position again. I was in another position. But I'm demoted, then you need to earn back trust, and you need to understand that it goes by, connecting well with people, listening very carefully, and then act. You need to act. People need to see through your actions that what you do is genuine, and that it comes from a place that is genuine and authentic and not made up or thought about or concocted or what have you. No, that it's something that is truly genuine, etc. And once they see you really doing it and doing work that you let other people do, right? Don't forget that they saw me instruct other people to do kind of stuff, and then you're the person who's doing all that work. Then they suddenly, after a while, start to think, well, wait a minute, maybe this is for real. This is for real. And then when you earn back that trust step by step, then actually you yourself become, as a person, by the way, you become much more relaxed, more comfortable, and then you're a collaborator in a team that tries to make things better, and then you see the progression over time that things are better, and then suddenly you note, because here's the output of that story. 3 years later, I was reappointed in the same job that I was demoted from.
Oh.
So I came back as the leader, but this time as a different kind of leader.
Yeah.
And as a leader who the people knew because I had worked with everybody.
Yeah.
So the mandate that I had, they trusted me. I had earned their trust.
If you enjoyed this conversation, which I hope you have, and you want to get access to the second half of this, remember to head over to greatleadership.substack.com. You can just enter your email there and you will get access to all of these other second half interviews that we're going to be releasing over the coming weeks and months leading up to the book launch. And of course, I hope you pre-order a copy of the book. It really looks at how leaders can approach vulnerability in the right way. The big argument that I make is leaders should not be vulnerable at work, but instead they should lead with vulnerability. And there is a key and a crucial difference between the two. So pre-order at leadwithvulnerability.com, and you'll also get access to some pretty cool bonuses that we're going to be announcing very, very soon. Thanks. I'll see you next time.